Thank you for joining us today. My name is Gary Cassidy. I'm the Director of Wellness and Employee Education and Communication at Corporate Synergies. I've been at Corporate Synergies for 15 years. I also spent 5 years at Independence Blue Cross, and I have a total of 35 years experience delivering strategic communication, content, designs, and solutions. As part of my role here, I'm a published author and a frequent speaker, and myself and my team have been fortunate to provide award-winning strategies and solutions to our clients on a regular basis. So today, we're going to talk about the other side of wellness. And you'll understand what that means as we start to go through the presentation. So when we look at this side, we'll call this side A of wellness. We have B, B, and E. We have why they work, and we're going to talk about some insights. On the other side of wellness, we're going to talk about new dimensions. We're going to talk about life's challenges. We're going to talk generations and financial wellness. And then we're going to finish off talking specifically about new challenges, new normal, new solutions, and the ambiguous B. So I'm just going to dive right in. As we talk about wellness, there are things that automatically come to mind, and I'm going to talk about the three big ones right up front. We have blood, otherwise known as the biometric screening. We're going to talk about broccoli, otherwise known as the health risk assessment, and we're going to talk about exercise, otherwise known as physical activity. These three form the foundation for most wellness programs. And there's a very, very good reason why they do that. It's because they work. And it's what they provide for employers that they need while they're creating a wellness program. So under biometric screenings, we like biometric screenings because they're measurable, because they provide a baseline of the health and of the organization, because they're repeatable. They can be done year after year, so it's easier to track change. They help us stratify health risks within the population, low risk, medium risk, high risk, and to really identify and detect chronic conditions that are prevalent within the organization. And then that allows organizations to focus on prevention, and this is one of the key metrics that are going to help drive organizations towards seeing that hard dollar return on investment, especially when they compare it to their claims and their pharmacy data and their utilization of benefits and the services. The biometric screens forms a very solid foundation to build upon. The next is the health risk assessment. I say health risk assessment, I'm sure some of you are going, really? Well, health risk assessments provide measurable results again. It provides a baseline of health within the organization. It's repeatable. It helps you stratify certain risks within the organization. It provides education. Properly done health risk assessment will provide feedback to the participant about information where they are lacking. It will help drive prevention, getting people to make changes to their lifestyle, but this typically falls into the value of investment or a soft dollar return. When I look at the two of these, I always say biometric screenings are reality, and the health risk assessment is perception. And I found over the years that there are two reasons that people will lie when they do their health risk assessment. The first is they're worried that you're going to find out that they don't eat as much vegetables as they should, or that they drink a little more than you think, or they don't exercise as much, and they're going to go on some list that means they're going to get let go. The other kind of person, though, who lies on a health assessment is somebody who just doesn't know. They may not be getting their biometric screenings, and when they go in and fill out their information about existing chronic conditions, about their exercise, their eating, and their work-life balance habits, they may be answering 100% honestly, but they just don't know. And this is where the real value of a health assessment comes into play, is that it takes the perception of somebody's health And then it gives them a mirror to look into, which are the biometric screenings, where they can actually see, this is what I think I am, but this is what I really am. And this is where the education, the engagement, the prevention, and all those factors really start to work together. And then the last one is physical exercise. We all know the benefits of physical exercise. And let me just set the stage here. When I say physical exercise, I'm not talking people getting ready to run a marathon or swim the English Channel or climb Mount Everest. All of those are fine things to do. All we want people to be is active, to be healthier than they are on a daily basis than if they were sitting at the desk all day. Because we know that physical exercise can help reduce health risks. They can increase prevention of health risks occurring, cardiac disease, hypertension, things like that. It helps to manage those health risks. It elevates the person's mood. It helps them control their weight. It helps address musculoskeletal issues. But again, at the end of the day, we're still talking about the value of investment when we look at that, because it's very hard to attribute that to any hard dollar amount. So the insights that they provide are critical to an organization as you make decisions about what kind of benefits you offer, what kind of services, what kind of incentives you offer as part of your wellness strategy, how you allot points to certain activities within your wellness program. But it's interesting when you take a look at everything that the blood and the broccoli and the exercise provides to an organization, when we're talking in terms of productivity and profitability, it has a huge impact. But what we're also finding is that there's another side of wellness that can have just as much of an impact in ways that maybe you hadn't considered until this point. So I'm going to drop right in here. I'm going to talk about the whole theory of don't think, just play. Anybody here, if I was in front of a live audience, I'd say, okay, raise your hand if you played sports. I'm going to assume some of you are raising your hands, some of you are not. But one of the most overused cliches in sports is that 90% of performance is mental. And the problem is that 90% of athletes spend about 100% of their time working on the physical and fundamental aspects related to their sport. But in reality, sports are really 100% mental, and they're also 100% physical. Just think about anybody who's ever been out. I ride my bike, so I'm going to use that as an example. And I'm riding my bike, and I'm riding into a headwind, and I'm coming up on 60 miles, and my legs feel like lead, yet I get focused in my brain, I refocus myself, and all of a sudden, I'm moving better than I thought I would. So a lot of times the mental strength drives the physical strength, and our thoughts influence our actions, and our actions influence our thoughts. And you may wonder, why am I talking about that? Because similarly, we want to identify what drives your employees to be successful. And when we take a look at the big three, the B, B, and E, the blood, broccoli, and exercise, if someone has in-range biometrics, that does not guarantee that they're going to be a perfect employee. If they have positive health assessment results, that does not guarantee a driven employee. If they regularly participate in physical activity, that does not guarantee an engaged employee. They may be healthy, their biometrics may be in range, they may be eating well, they may be exercising, their blood pressure is great, everything is exactly where you want it to be. But there's a whole other side of wellness that helps determine how your employee is going to be performing his job, how he's going to be interacting with his fellow coworkers. And a lot of those factors impact the productivity of that employee. Also, it impacts the profitability of the organization, because if the employee is not doing what they need to do, then they're not going to be producing as much as they should, and you're going to see a loss and you're going to see impact. So does it help? Absolutely. But is the B, B, and E, the blood, the broccoli, the exercise, is it the entire answer? Definitely not. So what we want to look at are new dimensions. And when we look at these dimensions, these are things that are addressing those other factors, because there are additional dynamics influencing your employees' health and productivity. And these are the ones that we're going to be talking about for a little bit. So first up, we have physical, taking proper care of our bodies so we can function properly and optimally. Now, does physical activity fall into that? Yes, but also in physical are biometric screenings, health assessment, and doing all those things you need to do to maintain your body. There's financial, having financial security and freedom of choice in the present and the future. Again, we're focusing on your employees or anyone who's participating as part of your wellness plan. We're focusing on their emotional health, their stress levels, their level of disengagement, and all of these factors that we're going to be talking about are actually driving those attributes. Spiritual, not to get too deep, but we're just talking about finding balance in our lives by aligning our values with our actions. Nutritional, focusing on creating a healthy diet to help balance mood and anxiety levels. Believe it or not, how healthy you eat and how well you eat has the impact on your mood and your anxiety. So by focusing on that, you can help to maintain stress levels and things of that nature. And then we look at emotional, understand and accept ourselves and dealing with life's challenges. What are life's challenges? Other employees, clients, balancing work and life, all these things that come into play are an important part of who we are and how productive we are. Social, building and maintaining positive relationships that add value to our lives. For people who have been used to working in the office for so long with all the other employees, when the COVID-19 hit and people started working remotely, they had to rebuild what that meant to be social. They needed to find new ways to connect. They needed to look at things in a different way. That can create stress for that person. The environment, being aware of our environment and the impact we have to the world around us, and that can include volunteering, charitable giving, basically any way that we can support each other and help each other as a community. And then the last and probably the most important, especially in the things that have been happening recently, are occupational. Feeling fulfilled with our jobs and career path while maintaining the holy grail of work-life balance. So when we're talking about balancing life's challenges, we know we have stress at work, we have meetings, we have deadlines, we have all these things going on. Everybody has it. Everybody deals with it in different ways. But then we need to think that this person is still a person when they're not at work and they're at home and they're dealing with things like planning weddings, divorce, retirement, a new house, selling a house, college, student loans, elder child care, legal issues, pregnancy, childbirth, major injury or illness, death, addiction, job loss, marital issues, relationship issues, mortgages, and the list goes on. I'm sure you have many more that haven't even been mentioned there. But just think about how that happens when you take all that stress that you have from work, and then you have all the stress that happens in life. How do you deal with that? How do you cope with that? How do you find the balance in that? Your biometric results, your HRA, and your exercise aren't going to get you from A to B. So there have to be other dimensions, other resources that are available to help your employees to manage those stressors. So when we look at overwhelmed or disengaged employees, there are some things that we know about them based upon Gallup poll, Virgin polls, and American Institutes of Stress. Employees who are overwhelmed or disengaged, they have dropping productivity. They dropping quality of work. They go quiet. Sometimes that's the worst thing in the world. They just kind of fester in their own heads. Increased anger and lashing out. Increased time spent away from their desk. Avoids coworkers, lunch, and other events. Increasingly late to work or early to leave. Uses sick days as often as possible. Doesn't want to take on more challenges or responsibilities. actively disengaged employees cost the United States between 483 to 605 billion each year in lost productivity. And I want you to take a look at this list on the left. Back when everybody was in the office, it was pretty easy to see. But now that we're working remotely, we're working at home, it might just be that one employee in there, they're left to their own devices. And sometimes that can create new levels of stress and just exacerbate everything that you're seeing over there. So what's the impact to a disengaged or overly stressed employee? Well, according to the American Institute of Stress, the American Psychological Association, and the Queen School of Business, stressed and disengaged employees have on average 37% higher absenteeism. They have on average 49% more accidents due to inattention, 60% more errors, 18% lower productivity, 16% lower profitability, 37% lower job growth, 55% lower stock prices, and they have 50% voluntary turnover. And any one of those numbers can negatively impact your organization as these things exacerbate and they develop. For a lot of organizations, an option is the Employee Assistance Program. And the good thing is they'll help a lot of employees address personal difficulties, job stress, relationship difficulties, elder care, child care, harassment, substance abuse, separation and loss, work-life balance, financial or legal issues, family violence, layoff assistance, long-term illness, disability challenges, counseling for crisis, and manager support. But what's your actual EAP utilization like? And when those people call, are they getting individual support, or are they getting the blanket answer for this is how you can go about resolving this issue? Which brings us to the next important part of this conversation, is we started out with the basic building blocks of a wellness program. We've taken a look at some of the other dimensions, but each of these other dimensions, depending upon who you're speaking to or the generation that you're speaking to, it's going to mean something completely different to them. And it's going to be based upon age, gender, health risk status, marital status, family size, socioeconomic status, personal experiences, and lots of other significant factors that we don't have here. But it's important as you think about your population and you think about the physical and the financial and the spiritual and the nutritional and the emotional and the social and the environmental and the occupational, is that they can't all hear the same message, because that message means something very different to them. So what I want to do is talk about the idea that providing broad answers produces broad results. So we're going to talk about who these generations are and how they are each unique. And we're going to talk about it from social markers, ideal leadership style, work style, their learning style, and how we should market to them, how they expect to receive information. So we're going to start first up with the traditionalists, born 1943 or before that. Their social marker was World War II. Their ideal leader in the business, in the office, is a commander type. Their work style is disciplined. Their learning style, they like formal, and the way they want to be communicated to is in print. And now we go on to the baby boomers, 1944 to 1964. One of their major social markers was the moon landing. Their ideal version of a leader is a thinker. Their work style is experimental. Their learning style is structured. And marketing-wise, they want broadcast. They want mass distributions of information. And now we have Generation X, 1965 to 1980. Their social marker, the recession. Their ideal leader is a doer. not a talker, but as somebody who actually rolls up their sleeves and they're a doer. Their work style is very independent. Their learning style is participative. And marketing to them, they want it direct, they want it targeted. This is where variable digital printing comes into play. You have the person's name in there, Dear John, this is coming specifically to you. Next up, we have the millennials, or Generation Y. 1980 to 1996, one of their many major milestones was 9/11, social markers. Their ideal leader is a supporter. Their work style is immediacy as far as rewards and recognition and things of that nature. Their learning style is interactive, and marketing to them, everything online with a link. That's where they want it. Don't send me a piece of paper, don't send me a postcard, just tell me where to go and I'll click through and I'll find it. And then the last is we have Generation Z. Their social marker, financial crisis. Their ideal leader is a collaborator. Their work style, they have high expectations. They want to move through the food chain. They want that recognition again. Their learning style is multimodal, which means a lot of it online, but they want to have channels of choice so that they can get the information when they want it. They don't want to have to wait for the postcard to show up. They already want to know where to go. And marketing to them, they like it in situ, or in real time. They want it face-to-face. They want it local. That's how they want to be marketed to, with the information that they have. Now, it's interesting. We look at these, and these are, I'll call these generalities, as far as framing who these people are. And as employers, it's important to understand somewhat who you're talking to. But I'll use my kids as an example. My daughter was born in 1994, and she is full-on millennial. Can't get around that. My son, born 1967, is a Zer, but quite honestly, he acts and thinks more like an Xer, which is me. And then you have somebody like me. I was born in 1965, right on the cusp of the boomer, but I've got a little boomer in me, and I've got a lot of X in me. So you can see how that can kind of balance itself out in between. So what does this mean when you're trying to communicate with them, when you're trying to share that message? I'm going to use financial wellness as an example of how we would approach each one of these generations and what their needs are. And financial wellness, again, is having financial security and freedom of choice in the present and the future. So when we're talking about financial wellness to traditionalists, they are generally already well into their retirement. They want to focus on stability. They are vulnerable. They need to focus on healthcare, and if they haven't done it already, they need to get on estate planning as soon as they can. And again, they want print materials. That's how they want to be communicated to. And then we go to the boomers. They're focusing on retirement. They're like right there. They're like right at the edge. They're ready to step their toe over, and they're ready to move into retirement. But they prefer one-on-one advisors. They're concerned at this point because they can see retirement closing in about the gaps in savings. And they focus on that all-expensive long-term care. What happens when I'm not on my company's health plan anymore? How am I going to afford all those costs? And then we have right in the middle, we have the Xers, also known somewhat as the sandwich generation, because they're dealing not only potentially with retired parents who they may have to financially support, but they're also dealing with their kids who are going to college, and that cost just keeps going up and up. They're looking for tools, and they're starting to realize, you know what, I'm here, but retirement isn't that far away. I really need to get engaged with a financial planner and get some sort of a strategy in place. And then we have the millennials. Their focus is they're not even really thinking retirement right now. They're thinking, I've got student loans. I have financial crises going on. I need help managing. I got to consolidate. I should probably start to think about retirement, but I can't do any of that until I get a handle on the first three. And then we have the Generation Z. They're focused on savings, emergency funds, and budgeting. They've seen what happens to the millennials. They see what's happening with the economy. They know they need to buffer themselves. And they also want to focus on their spending habits. So if you send out a blanket basic 401k communication, of all of the same exact one to all of these people, the audience that's probably really going to pay attention to it is X, little m, little b, because they should already be there. But you're really going to use the traditionalists, and you're going to lose the Generation Z, even though they should be thinking about it. They're living paycheck to paycheck, probably still living at home, so they can't even wrap their head around 30, 40, 50 years from now. For any of these, if I try to do something about estate planning, who is that really going to apply to? So it's really finding the right communication at the right time, providing multiple channels of choice for people to be able to get that message. Because I can tell you, if somebody from Generation Z gets a financial wellness message that speaks specifically to the things that can impact them, they're going to look for the next one. But if they get one that has to do with stuff 30, 40 years down the road, they're going to say, that's not for me. And a lot of times that's what's happening with some wellness programs out there right now. There's been a trend in the industry for wellness programs to allow people to create their own personal paths to health and well-being. Instead of having a set of this, and this, somebody who's 20 is going to have a different wellness experience than someone who's 40 or 50 or 60. And we need to let them follow that path so that they feel engaged, that they feel that this wellness program gets me, my company understands me. These are the things that I need to do right now to be healthy. We're not going to present somebody in Generation Z with a colonoscopy, but we may tell them that they need, as part of their preventive care, they need to do some testicular self-exams, or if it's females, breast self-exam, not going to the mammogram, but having relevant preventive care and wellness activities that they can do to maintain their health. The ultimate goal of this approach is to create a powerful personal experience. Again, so that they know that you know who they are and they're getting the information that they need and that is meaningful to them. So let's play a quick game of what if. Understanding all the communication channels of choice that you have with your employees, and understand, I'm talking pre-COVID-19, you were sending out emails, you had some posters, maybe you had some postcards, you had some team meetings, and you had the wellness program in place with the biometrics and the health assessment and exercise and preventive care screenings, and everything seemed to be going in pretty well. Work-life balance was pretty good because when people were in work, they were in work, and when they were at home, they were at home, and you tried to eliminate some of the crossover in there so people could stay focused and could be productive. But what if something happened that just blew all that up? That all of a sudden, one day, the people weren't in the office anymore, and mailings weren't really working, and you couldn't meet face-to-face, and you couldn't communicate with each other the way that you used to. Well, we don't have to wonder because it did. And for myself and for my colleagues at Corporate Synergies and for any client that we're talking with on a regular basis, they're still trying to figure out this new normal because they can't do things the way that they used to, and they're faced with new challenges that they didn't even have before. The employees are faced with new challenges than they ever had before. So what I'd like to do is dive in a little bit, keeping in mind what we have previously talked about, and we're going to talk about that elusive work life. Again, as I said before, people went into the office, they went to work. They went home, that was life. It was a little bit easier trying to separate those two. But now that people are working remotely, what we actually have is this. It's all happening in the same place at the same time. So it's forcing people almost to confront the reality of what is my work-life balance. because it's here. I can't go to work and get away from work. I can't and get away from life, and I can't come home to life and get away from work. It's all there. It's all there all the time. And because of the fact that things are closed and schools are closed and all these other things are happening, there's even more stressors and more opportunities for employees to become disengaged as we go through this process. So let's talk new challenges. Mental and emotional health is becoming the focus. I can tell you for all of the wellness programs that I'm currently running for our clients, they've completely changed. And they're trying to provide wellness activities that are specific to the current culture and environment that we're in, because what you had been doing just really doesn't seem as relevant anymore. Because when we look at these new challenges, daily routines were disrupted. Employees were asked to work from home and be self-driven and self-focused. Employees and employers were forced to reassess work-life balance. Introverts thrived. Extroverts suffered. Generations faced different challenges. Retirement planning was addressed and readdressed every time the stock market goes up or down. Personal goals and expectations were adjusted. New personal responsibilities became stressors. And if you want to talk stressors, these are some from surveys and studies that have been found, is that people who have been working at home, who are not used to working at home, their biggest concern is that they're in a perpetual state of anxiety because they don't know when they're going back to work, if they are going back to work. They say it's going to be 2 weeks. Oh, we've had another spike. Now it might not be till next year. That puts people in a perpetual state of anxiety. These employees who are working from home also feel the need to be constantly on, talking about work-life balance. They want to make sure that they're working enough because a lot of them have this deep-seated fear that if they don't prove their worth on a daily basis, which could mean working 10, 12, 14, 16 hours just to show them I'm still working, I'm still doing what I need to do, I'm still a productive employee, that creates a whole nother level of stress as they try to balance out all the other things that are going on. How many parents thought when this COVID started that they would become the teachers and that they would have to engage with their kids on the education and their learning? This just creates whole new levels of change that we're seeing. So how did the new normal approach impact what we had been doing? Well, in a lot of cases, especially in the early parts of it, doctors weren't open and clients who had scheduled on-site biometric screenings, nope, they didn't happen. People couldn't get in to get their preventive care screenings, their dentals, their colonoscopies, their mammographies, all these things. Couldn't do that. Physical activity. Some people were sheltered in home. They couldn't get out. So physical activity was problematic. You couldn't do those step challenges. You couldn't do those sorts of activities. And besides which, people were so worried about somebody coughing on them or not wearing a mask that really talking to them about physical activity was really kind of low on their list. And then we talked steps and activity. Gyms? Nope. Opportunity to go to gyms? Nope. Employee-focused activities where everybody came together? Nope. That was also off the list. And basically live anything. Lunch and learns, health fairs, on-site biometrics, company picnic, fitness facilities, happy hours, even basic water cooler talk. Done. It's not there. You're working remotely and you're Zooming with each other, you're calling each other, you're IMing each other. But one of the challenges that this created for wellness programs that were already in place is that they also needed to stay compliant. So if the previous wellness program said, we'll give you 50 points if you complete your biometrics and your health risk assessment, and you'll get 10 points for each preventive care, and you'll get 1 point for every 70,000 steps that you took, and we'll reimburse you for gym membership, and you can get this, the whole program had to change because you didn't know when that was going to happen, but you also had to be compliant by providing people with the opportunity annually to earn points to earn the incentive that was in place in the organization. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So what we found was that these are the things that became important, and all of these things that became important, I'm telling you, as I'm building the 1/1/21 wellness programs for my clients now for next year, they're still maintaining this. They're still focusing on these things because they know that the stress and the post-traumatic stress and all these things are going to be factors in how productive and emotionally and mentally healthy their participants actually are. So I'm seeing an uptick in requests for information about stress health, emotional health, mental health, preventive care that can be done at home, self-care, mindfulness, social. And as far as activities go, I have a client who for the last 6 years, as a major part of their wellness program, they had been doing a STEP activity challenge. Well, for the first time this year, they did a COVID well-being awareness challenge because it was that important, because they weren't, A, not all the participants could do steps, and B, they were more focused on keeping their health and their well-being and protecting themselves from disease and from picking that up. So the activity type challenges that people are doing are stress challenges, nutrition, weight, well-being, COVID-19, financial health, sleep. All of these sorts of things are becoming some of those critical factors that people are doing. And then virtual everything. Zoom, yoga, meditation, dance, meetings, happy hours, bedtime stories. I know you're looking at this list and you're going, are you kidding me? One of my clients down in DC, they had a lot of activities going on, but they also had some activities planned for the year that were in person. So they invested with an organization, and they provided their employees access to virtual yoga, virtual meditation, and virtual dance. And we created a points management system so that people could earn points by doing those activities. And I have to give a shout out to Corporate Synergy's CARES Committee, because as soon as this whole COVID-19 thing happened, they got a committee together, and every week they have events virtually that employees who are in their homes can participate in. They have virtual happy hours. We even have a gentleman who will do bedtime stories for the children, for the people who have children at home, to help them go to sleep. So there's all sorts of different ways and different things to look at that can help you be successful in this new normal. And again, giving yourself the opportunity to say, this was the standard of health, and it still is important, but we have some really big issues coming up here as we readjust to this new environment, and these are some of the changes that we might want to think about making. So as we come to the end of this, and I know we've talked about a lot of information, one of the really critical things that you can do is, again, speak to your generations, finding out what's important to them, making sure that it's connected to your strategic goals and objectives of your organization, as well as your ability to be profitable and for your employees to be productive, but making it meaningful to them depending upon where they are in their life, so that the information is useful to them and it will drive them to engage in that information. So when we take a look at this, we're to the end of the presentation where we have the ambiguous B. So one thing we want to try to always be is be open. This is a new frontier. We have to be willing to try anything, and we have to try it, pull it back, and then kind of play with it that way and find out what works for you, your culture, your organization, your employees. Don't be afraid to open it up to the spouses and domestic partners on plan, and definitely the employees on plan. Really embrace all of them in this process so that they can pull together. The other thing is to be flexible. Saying this used to work, might be time to say, we got to try something new. because what we used to do, we can't do it that way. And the more things get shut down and tightened up, it's becoming harder and harder to come up with new ways to do things, which is why you want to make sure that you try to stay creative. Be as creative as you can be with what you have. If you would have asked our HR department, our CARES committee, 5 months ago, hey, what would you think of, you have a gentleman in the office and he loves children, he loves reading books. What if we had virtual bedtime stories for your employees at home, for your children at home? They would have said, I don't think that's, we're not there right now. We don't need to do that. Well, now we're finding that that's a nice way to help provide some stress relief for parents who have been dealing with their kids all day, teaching them subjects. Don't get me started on the new math. And they might need that break. And it'd be something interesting for the kids to do also. So it's really being open and being flexible and being creative in how you want to approach this. But the last one, and probably the most important one, is that you want to be compliant. Now, good news for you. I am not going to talk to you about compliance because that is not my expertise. But our next presentation coming up from Dan Cooperstein and Dorothy Summers, they are our compliance experts at Corporate Synergies, and they're going to take you through the important stuff you need to know to be prepared, to be successful and compliant in the new normal. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Gary. That was really helpful, extremely informative, and definitely very relevant to what we're seeing. I think I speak for both Dot and myself, and those are definitely issues that we're seeing out there as we talk to our clients out in the field. And so definitely very important presentation, and thank you. So welcome to Compliance Update. I'm Dan Cooperstein.
And I'm Dot Summers.
And Dot and I are happy to be here with you today, presenting from our homes as the coronavirus pandemic continues through our country this summer. If you've been with us before, you know that this show is about presenting you with the really important health and welfare benefits compliance news, and of course discussing the impact of these developments on your benefit plans without getting political, of course, because that's, well, not what the show's about. And just as some background on me and Dot, Dot and I work together at Corporate Synergies, overseeing the national benefits consulting practice, helping clients out in all aspects of employee benefits compliance and regulatory matters. Dot brings over 20 years of experience in benefits to our team and is our subject matter expert in all things health and welfare. I bring approximately 15 years of experience practicing as a lawyer in employee benefits and executive compensation matters, including assisting clients of all shapes and sizes with DOL, IRS, and other government audits and investigations of their benefit plans.
So Dan, I was thinking as you were talking that I think it's been like 4 months since I've seen you. I actually think the last time I saw you was we were doing one of these, but live in the office. So, that's pretty much a long time, that we haven't seen each other.
Definitely. It's like a foggy, distant memory at this point. I mean, when I'm trying to think back to when last time we did this in person, it's absolutely crazy. And really, it's just so crazy how much has happened, in those 4 months or so from a compliance standpoint. And it's just really amazing. So today's topic is return to work, the implications for your benefit plans. And what we're going to be discussing today is going to be focused on the compliance-related impact on your benefit plans of returning employees back into the workplace, even as we as a country in many places are still continuing to struggle with this COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, and while you may originally signed up for our webinar on the new wellness rules, that was supposed to be our webinar for this quarter. But unfortunately, I think with everything that's happened with the COVID-19, that the governmental agencies are a little busy with other things, and the EEOC has yet to finalize those rules. So in light of their delay, we're going to be talking about something that is certainly much more relevant than those wellness rules to our current day-to-day lives. So we should mention, however, though, that the EEOC in the last several weeks did say that that they are planning on issuing these, and it's not completely off their radar, and that they should hopefully have regulations under the ADA soon. So we'll continue to keep you informed through our e-alerts and our compliance resource page about updates on this topic. So I think, Dan, the first thing is great. Yeah, I was gonna say the first thing is, I think we need to talk about, kind of what's happening now, with this, the pandemic.
Exactly right. And thanks, Dot. And I think what we're really seeing is just this unusual situation where, this is a chart here that you see on your screen from June 30th, where I think some folks had thought that we were going to be seeing, a change in the number of cases. But of course, around June 30th, we saw a new spike in the United States. And if you remember back in March, around the time of our last webinar, the president had just recently declared that there was going to be a travel ban on people coming to the United States from the European Union. And now, of course, the European Union is, countries in the European Union are putting travel bans on us, United States citizens, from coming into the European Union because our cases have really spiked. And obviously we can speculate, this is not a political show, of course, and we're not going to speculate on all different reasons, but of course, one of the things that, Dr. Anthony Fauci and others have said is that perhaps in some states we maybe reopened too quickly or didn't, maybe threw caution to the wind, as he said. So definitely there's a lot to be concerned about as we return to the workplace. And yet, as more employees return to work, healthcare, workplace safety, and wellness vendors have been introducing a number of different health and safety solutions, such as medical testing, temperature checks. And when I say medical testing, I'm obviously referring to, especially COVID-19 testing, temperature checks, self-acknowledgement forms, and other workplace initiatives. And in the second half of this webinar, we're going to discuss the implications of these return-to-work health and wellness programs and policies on your benefits plans, compliance with HIPAA, ERISA, and relevant EEOC regulations and guidance, and really kind of dive a little bit more into that. But really the focus of that is going to be really on a lot of these recent developments, which have the law has changed in many of these areas recently. And over the last several months, we've heard from so many of our clients from across the country with questions and issues about this return to work topic that we knew was something that had to be addressed. And whether it's the employer or the employee, in many cases, employees are eager to go back into a normal, or we should say, more of a normal work environment in light of everything that's happened since earlier this year when the pandemic hit our country. But of course, before we do that deep dive, as we do in every show, we're going to start with our compliance update and really start after those last two landmark stimulus laws were passed, the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, FFCRA, and the CARES Act. So Dot, do you want to go ahead and get us started with talking about the deadline extension rules?
Sure, starting out fun. lots of confusion here with this one. So on May 4th, 2020, final regulations were released providing relief from certain compliance deadlines for group health plans, other health plans, and welfare benefits and retirement plans. So, the agencies recognized the difficulties faced by plan sponsors and individual participants during this COVID-19 pandemic. So what they did here with these regulations is they basically implemented or allowed that certain deadlines are basically extended or paused, if you will, for plan participants, plan administration during what is called an outbreak period. So an outbreak period is defined, it's a set period of time. It starts on March 1st, 2020, and it runs 60 days until 60 days after the end of the national emergency. Well, right now, when is the end of that national emergency? Unfortunately, we don't have one yet. So that 60 days after the end of the national emergency is still a floating date. If let's say that emergency ends at the end of this month, then you have 60 days after the end of this month for that pause period to start rolling again. So, definitely a confusing period. So these new rules pause certain compliance deadlines, not all compliance deadlines. We get this question, a lot. Well, what about, new enrollment in this? And it's not that. There are specific topics where, certain deadlines are paused. So the first pausing of a deadline or a due date is the 30-day HIPAA special enrollment period or the 60-day HIPAA special enrollment period. So basically, someone who has a child after March 1st would normally have a 30-day window to notify you to have that baby added to the plan. In this case, that someone has a baby on March 15th, technically would have to notify you by April 15th. Now that employee has until 30 days after 60 days following the end of the national emergency. Another period that's extended is the 60-day COBRA election period. Right now we have a lot of employees, unfortunately are being terminated. They're being offered COBRA. Normally they would have 60 days to elect that COBRA. Now that 60-day election period is paused again until 60 days after the end of the national emergency. Also deals with COBRA premium payments. So the 45-day initial payment due date is paused, as well as the subsequent monthly 30-day COBRA premium payments. There are COBRA notice deadlines, election notice from the plan administrator, COBRA qualifying event notice, notice of disability determination. Also, these apply to time periods for filing claims and appeals under the plan. You normally providers have that year deadline to submit a claim. If that year deadline is falling within this outbreak period, it's going to be extended. And for your plan participants, this does affect your FSA runout periods. So we know that most plans have a deadline for when claims have to be submitted to get reimbursement out of the FSA. That, again, now falls within this same paused period. And then also dealing with appeals and external reviews and providing additional information for that. Okay. Oops. Sorry, 1 minute. Oh my gosh. So sorry about that. Additionally, these rules are mandatory, for group health plans. They cannot choose to elect, to administer these or not. They also brought a lot of confusion. And the one piece, that's really brought out confusion was that payment of COBRA due dates. And a lot of questions that we received is, do these require an employer to keep a COBRA participant active even though they have until the end of the outbreak period to make a payment? The answer is sort of yes and sort of no. So we spoke with many COBRA vendors and received guidance from the DOL that it's not necessary that you have to continue to have the plan active. The employee is incurring expenses, and then they get to the end of the outbreak period and they never pay you. That's not really how they expect this to work. But under current COBRA rules and as well as in this outbreak period, the DOL has confirmed that claims can be either suspended or pended until payment is made, and coverage then can be retroactively reinstated. But one of the things that we know that a lot of vendors are doing, and we certainly would recommend, is that if you are talking to COBRA participants about these deadlines, we feel that the recommendation is if an employee is in need of benefits, that they should continue to pay their premiums, as they're going along. And I know everyone's tired of hearing me say this, but if someone doesn't have the money today to pay for 1 month of COBRA, do they really have 6 months worth of money to pay a COBRA premium back for 7 months when they were incurring claims all along? So, and then we also received confirmation from the DOL that updates to notices are, not technically required. They didn't want to put undue, work on employers, but, this should be information that you are sharing, with participants about these rules. Certainly COBRA vendors are updating they might not be updating their COBRA election notices, but they are sending supplementary documents and notices explaining that. So Dan, you want to talk a little bit further about that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that really confused a lot of people at this time was that around the same time these rules came out, the DOL issued model COBRA notices, which did not include any explanation at all. In fact, it was actually, I should say, it was after these deadline extension rules were released. The DOL created model COBRA notices, and nothing in those model notices said anything about these deadline extensions. And so it gave some employers out there that thought that, oh, hey, all I need to do is give these model notices and I'm okay from a compliance standpoint. But of course, there's a lot of litigation out there, especially in the COBRA area right now. And so, that litigation, participants are really focusing on, whether or not they received all the disclosures that were material to them as required under COBRA. And of course, for most plan sponsors out there, they're subject to ERISA, and ERISA's fiduciary obligations. They should do at least something. I think that's kind of how we've been advising our clients is do something, right? I mean, make sure your COBRA administrator is giving. In most cases, that's probably where it's going to have an impact, right? Your COBRA administrator or FSA administrator or somebody is going to have some kind of notice about how these rules changed. You don't have to do what we call sometimes the belt and suspenders approach of just having a completely, there's nothing in the law that requires you to do an amendment to your plan document or an SMM to your SPD or anything like that. But you should do at least something, even if it's something as simple as notifying participants by giving them a copy of our e-alert on this topic, or just, it could be anything. But I think your minimum defensible plan, or the absolute least that you could do to be in compliance here, would be to make sure that all of these changes are somehow, all the participants and beneficiaries are somehow notified of these changes, whether that's on a benefits website, or if the participants do not have access to the internet through a postcard of some kind. And you also want to reach out to participants and COBRA qualified beneficiaries, including and especially those without access to websites, whose election period or premium payment period or appeal period has already expired during the outbreak period, right? Because you may not be thinking about all those people who may be terminated from employment or terminated from the plan, but those are people who really could be impacted by this. And so it would be very important to give them at least some kind of notice about what's been happening. And then, of course, regardless of those sort of ERISA fiduciary obligations of most plan sponsors subject to ERISA on the notice, you also want to think about the vendor relationships here, the carrier relationships, right? You want to reach out to your plan vendors and insurance carriers, including your COBRA administrator, and ask, are there going to be any additional fees here? How can how can you, as the vendor, or third party or carrier, customize your notice materials to our plan, our benefits philosophy, or other documents? And so those are things that you really need to be kind of thinking about now as all these rules are changing. And before we kind of go on to the next topic, one thing that has caused a lot of confusion out there, and I think it's just really important that we kind of define some key terms, especially as we get more into the details of all of the changes that have happened in the last couple of months, is the difference between the national emergency and the public health emergency. So we have here at the top of the slide public health emergency, at the bottom national emergency. The rules that Dot just talked about in those DOL, in that DOL guidance and regulations, those rules refer to a national emergency. But at the same time, there are carriers that have been sending out notices and alerts, and we've been sending out alerts referring to something called a public health emergency. And I think it's important that we take a minute here to clarify the confusion, because, right, public health emergency, national emergency sounds exactly the same. While the rules, that Dot just discussed, of course, use national emergency, there was also recently FAQ guidance under the FFCRA and CARES Act that we'll be talking about shortly. And those laws, right, and the guidance, that under those laws refer to a public health emergency, and the terms are not the same. The FFCRA CARES Act guidance, which was issued initially on April 11th, defined many of the terms in those two statutes and explained that certain enhanced medical coverage requirements of those laws, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. We talked a little bit about them in our last webinar, COVID-19 diagnostic testing without cost sharing, things like that. Those things would be required to be in application and offered to participants during the public health emergency, which is defined as the emergency period declared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services on January 31 of 2020 and extending from the effective date of January 27th of 2020 until the present in 90-day extension periods declared by HHS, declared by the Secretary of HHS, and which was most recently extended through July 24th of 2020. And then, which by contrast, right, the provisions Dot just discussed apply to what's called the national emergency, and that is a period that is declared by the President under the Stafford Act. It became effective on March 1st of 2020. It continues through the present day. There's been no end date announced. And so that is causing a lot of confusion, especially when a carrier will send out an alert that says, well, the end of the public health emergency is July 24th, 2020. I think that's where we just got a lot of people giving us questions, but saying that doesn't make any sense. Like, we just saw this giant spike, at the end of June in Florida and Texas and, Arizona, California. How is it possible that in 10 days, the whole public health emergency is going to be over and that's the end? And I think some of that is because maybe, the carriers, they want to say that's the end date. Now, if you read this fine print, they usually say unless further extended, but maybe it's because those carriers want to end benefits a little earlier than they should. Now, what we've seen actually as a practical reality there is that most carriers, the vast majority of the carriers out there are offering those enhanced medical benefits offered during the public health emergency for the duration of the 2020 calendar year. So that's not something to be too concerned about, but it is an area that causes a lot of confusion. Okay, so
I know.
Don, do you want to talk about the new? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I know, for what, we feel we're pretty much on top of everything. And then someone asked this question and we were like, what? No, I didn't see any end to any, national emergency. And so that definitely had us going for, quite a few days trying to flush that out.
Exactly. Just to clarify, right? So every 90 days, right, the HHS secretary is supposed to release an announcement of the next 90-day extension. And sometimes it's not like something that you're going to see on the nightly news, right? So it could just be as simple as something updated on a website. So I think it's just important that, you just, stay informed, stay in contact with us or your account manager, and we'll keep you up to date on those things. Great.
Yeah. Great. All right. So let's then move on to the next guidance, and this is the IRS's guidance giving cafeteria plans flexibility during this COVID-19. So in May, the IRS issued two pieces of guidance allowing employers to make cafeteria plans significantly more flexible for participants during this pandemic. So the new guidance basically affects cafeteria plan permitted mid-year election. Mid-year election rules and health FSA carryover amounts during this 2020 calendar year. As we all know, Section 125 has pre-tax elections in their cafeteria plans, and those elections are generally irrevocable for the entire plan year unless the participant experiences one of their 14 or 16 permitted life events. But as a result of this current health emergency, many employees may have new needs regarding their health plan elections, FSA accounts, and who had previously elected to contribute to their dependent care accounts and had now experienced a decrease in daycare expenses, decrease in medical expenses just because, daycares are closed. You can't get to the dentist to get your cleaning, your preventative services, things like that. So what they felt is if we allow some flexibility in, allowing employees to change their elections and things like that, they felt, that this may help with some of that. So let's talk about the high level or the big items. So the first is cafeteria plan elections. So these are going to be elections for medical, medical, dental, and vision, any benefit that is paid on a pre-tax basis. So basically, employees who waived the health plan previously can make a new election. Employees can revoke an existing election and make a new election to enroll in a different health plan coverage option sponsored by the same employer, or change enrollment tiers. So you could, if you were in a single plan and you wanted to now add a child or a spouse, so you could go from self-only tier to family tier. Employees are also able to revoke an existing election provided that the employee attests in writing that the employee is enrolled or immediately will enroll in other health coverage not sponsored by the same employer. Now, again, remember that these are, well, I guess I didn't say this. This is a little bit different from the deadline extensions, is that is mandated, where this is kind of optional to the employer. So the employer has the option to choose to allow all of these, one of these, none of these, maybe allow somebody who has previously enrolled, didn't enroll, to enroll now, but maybe they don't want to offer a change in plan. So it's again, discretion of the employer to the extent that it's that there is no discrimination in that. So if you're going to allow it, you can't just allow certain employees to do it. It has to be your whole population of similarly situated employees. And some of the things that, to take into a factor and is going to be an important for the employer is that, do some of these changes kind of have the potential for adverse selection? Some of these changes, there's going to be allowing people onto your plan who maybe are now sicker, and so, your claims costs are going up, things like that. Amendment is to be required by December 31st, 2021 for any of the changes that the employer offers. Additionally, employees may make changes to their health FSA or dependent care elections. Employees can revoke an election, make a new election, decrease or increase an existing election in a health FSA or a DCAP. By plan design, because again, this can have an effect on the employer and the possibility of, overspent accounts and the employer being subject, being left with not enough funds to cover their payments, then employers may limit that decrease or the revocation to the FSA or the dependent care to salary reductions, to a limit of either has been used or has been already elected. So for example, if an employee previously elected $2,500 and they've used $2,000 of it, that employer may decrease them to only $2,000 so that any salary reductions that are already through the plan will cover the reimbursement. Any of these reductions or changes must be prospective, that any increase may be used for amounts incurred in the plan year prior to the election change. So even though the change is prospective, certainly if you had a claim prior to your prospective change, you would be able to use that. That's important, that changes cannot be retroactive. That also means no refunds. So again, if that person has elected $2,000 or $2,500, they've contributed $2,000, they can't say, well, I want to stop it now and I want, all of my $2,000 back. These rules have not changed the forfeiture rules under the FSA Independent Care, that use it or lose it rule. It is possible that could happen. These days, that's pretty much what we have to say. As of today, that's not permitted. And I think they, released these regulations in the hopes that this would help in those kind of unused funds. But again, we haven't seen anything. And again, any amendments for permitted changes by December 31st, 2021. And then the other notice within this guidance, and basically for the same reason as I just discussed, the COVID-19 health emergency will likely result in many participants having unused health FSA and dependent care dollars at the end of their plan year. So what this guidance also does is allows an employer to amend its plan to permit employees to apply unused health FSA or dependent care accounts remaining as of the end of a grace period ending in 2020 or a plan year ending in 2020, so that those funds could be used from the end of that grace period or the end of that plan year through December 31st, 2020. So you have a non-calendar year plan. The plan ended in July, beginning in June 30th. I still have $1,000 left in my account because I wasn't going to doctor's appointments. I couldn't use it. Same thing with dependent care. Normally, those funds are not used. The participant loses those. With these rules, then, the plan could extend and say, okay, now from now and through the end of the year, you can use those funds from the previous plan year, allowing them to kind of spend down that information. But again, same rules. Once we get to December 31st, 2020, there's no returning of funds, and those forfeiture rules apply. And then on top of these, they also added another rule in the fact that the agencies realized that plans that do offer a carryover, which we know, has been in place for several years, has been at $500, where the annual maximum to the FSAs started at $2,500, went to $2,550, $2,620. Right now we're at $2,750. So they kind of realized that, if we're increasing the annual maximum each year, then we probably should be increasing that carryover. So what they're doing with these rules is, again, allowing an employer to update their plan now to allow that change from the $500 carryover to the $550. And then moving forward, that amount will be increased, and basically it'll be 20% of the annual maximum. So $550 is 20% of the $2,750. Next, 2021, let's say they increase it to $2,800, then you'll have, a carryover of $560. And again, just before we move on to the next topic, again, that the employer has absolute discretion in deciding which of these, any or all of these changes can occur, and again, any plan amendments required by December 31st, 2021. Okay. Dan, why don't you take the confusing drug coupon rules?
Great, thanks. I love talking about confusing drug coupon rules, so I will do that. On May 14th, we saw a new regulation. U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, or CMS, and HHS, they issued a notice of benefit and payment parameters for 2021, which we'll just call the notice, or the 2021 notice. And that notice, which is the final regulation, updates the rules pertaining to many important Affordable Care Act topics for health plans and insurers, such as out-of-pocket cost limits and employer shared responsibility penalties, and makes many clarifications for the upcoming year for 2021. And so it's a pretty important regulation we look at every year. And one of the more significant clarifications contained in the new notice for 2021 was the clarification regarding drug coupons. The notice explains how drug manufacturer support, which is just, their fancy word for drug coupons, are counted toward the ACA's annual cost sharing limits, which is an area that has caused considerable confusion over the last couple of years. And all of that confusion was due to the fact that the prior year's notice, which is the 2020 Notice of Benefit and Payment Parameters, which we'll just call the 2020 notice, which of course came out in 2019, it allowed plans to exclude participants' savings from drug coupons for brand medications when calculating costs toward the ACA's annual cost-sharing limits if the brand drug had a generic equivalent. However, the actual text of the 2020 notice was unclear about whether the availability of a generic equivalent was the only circumstance in which a plan could exclude drug coupon savings when calculating costs toward the ACA's annual cost-sharing limits, which left many open questions that the agencies admitted themselves created a lot of problems. It was problematic. including questions for plans that were considering copay accumulator programs that subtract the value of branding and drug coupons from costs credited toward the plan's out-of-pocket maximums, even when no generic equivalent is available. It also raised questions about how to apply this rule to HSA-compatible high-deductible health plans. So fortunately, the new 2021 notice, which we just got May 14th, clarifies all this confusion and explains that to the extent consistent with current state law, any amounts paid toward reducing the cost sharing incurred by a participant using drug coupons may be counted toward the ACA's annual cost sharing limits. And the key word there is may, because it's essentially giving the flexibility or discretion to the plan or insurance carrier. So in other words, unless a state law requires otherwise, right, sponsors of group health plans or insurance carriers will, in 2021, as in past years, continue to have that flexibility to determine whether or not to include dollar amounts of drug coupons toward the ACA's annual limits on cost sharing, regardless of whether a generic equivalent is available or not. And then, of course, it also clarifies that the previous rules applicable to high deductible health plans have not changed. So those rules stay the same, and drug coupons can still be used with regard to high deductible health plans and HSAs. So, Doc, do you want to talk about the PCOR fee? And we'll go from there.
Great. Yep. So on June 8th, the IRS released somewhat surprising guidance, which clarifies that the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute fee, PCOR, sometimes some people call it PCORI, will continue. So as we were all aware, under the ACA, the PCOR fee applied to employer-sponsored self-insured health plans, and including health reimbursement arrangements, or HRAs, for a 7-year period. So from the original ACA from 2010, this PCOR fee was due from plan years or policy years from 2012 through 2018. So this meant that for calendar year plans, the 2018 policy plan year was to be the last year for which PCOR fees would apply, and that final payment would have been made by July 31st, 2019. However, budget legislation passed in December of 2019 reinstated the PCOR fee beginning in 2020 for an additional 10 years through 2029. But instead of reinstating the fee, so for, again, that calendar year plan that had to report for 2018, instead of giving them a break for 2019 and starting it up again in 2020, they just continued the fee. So, this definitely brought on a lot of confusion for our calendar year plans, for 2019, because a lot of them thought that they were going to get a reprieve for the payment due by the end of this month for the 2019 plan year. So, if you do have a calendar year plan, you're a self-funded plan, you have an HRA, your plan year runs, January to December 31 for 2019, just be aware that you do have a requirement to make that payment by July 31st, 20. And the new amount for that is $2.54. Okay. And then let's also talk next about some regulation, and Dan did talk about this payment and parameters kind of regulation, and then this also kind of goes along with that as far as it's dealing with preventive services, and that is the requirements that HIV medications become required, basically any type of HIV PrEP drug with antiretroviral therapy must be offered for plan years beginning on or after July 1st, 2020 at no cost to patients at high risk of HIV infection. And this is as a part of a preventative service under the ACA requirement. So as background, under the ACA, private health plans, including employer-sponsored plans and those offering coverage through the ACA exchanges, must provide coverage for a range of preventive services recommended by the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force that are labeled either an A or B rating. So once this task force has labeled, a service or a drug with this A or B rating, then those drugs under the ACA may not impose cost sharing such as copays, deductibles, or coinsurance on patients receiving these recommended preventive services. So as a result of the USPSTF's latest recommendation, HIV PrEP drugs, which include most common brand names like Truvada and Descovy, will now need to be offered under all plans with no cost sharing, again, beginning on or after July 1st. So meaning if your plan is, again, is a calendar year plan, then, you can expect that, for your plan year starting 1/1/2021, that these drugs will be covered. All right. So Dan, you want to talk about some other ACA rules?
Yes, definitely. So we had some very big developments happen recently, last month, with regard to gender identity and sexual orientation discrimination, and really quite a remarkable series of events. First, on June 12th of last month, the Department of Health and Human Services decided to issue a new final regulation under ACA Section 1557 that would change the way that the discrimination on the basis of sex would be defined. And going back just to some quick background on ACA Section 1557, that this is a law that prohibits discrimination by health plans. It applies to health plans that receive federal funding from the Department of Health and Human Services. Most of the time, this is applies to carriers, but could also apply to certain employers sponsoring plans that receive federal funding, like in particular medical providers and other types of employers in the hospitals, medical providers, things like that. The old rule issued under the Obama administration had said that discrimination on the basis of sex included sex stereotyping and discrimination on the basis of gender identity and termination of pregnancy. There was a lot of litigation about this and what this meant and what plans had to do, and was this, if applicable to religious employers, and just lots of questions and controversy surrounded these rules. Also, there was an understanding that covered health plans and insurers were going to have to now cover, as a result of that rule, would have to cover gender reassignment surgery, among other changes. So this new final ACA Section 1557 regulation issued on June 12th said that the rule no longer defines discrimination on the basis of sex to include any of those things. So it no longer includes sex stereotyping and discrimination on the basis of gender identity and termination of pregnancy. Also, the new final 1557 rule would no longer, among other changes, there are many changes, including notice requirements and other things, which we've explained in our e-alert on this topic. The rule no longer requires the covered health plans and insurers to cover gender reassignment surgery, which I think is something that there were a lot of questions about. So that was a very big development that happened on June 12th, and then quite literally the next business day, really on June 15th, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark decision. I think certainly it was something that there was a lot of litigation over, indicating that the definition of discrimination on the basis of sex includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or status as a homosexual. So that would extend, of course, was traditionally referred to as, commonly referred to as LGBTQ. And so, really, it's really quite interesting because, the agency, HHS, had just, said that this does not include this in our definition of discrimination on the basis of sex. And then the Supreme Court said, no, literally one business day later, these things are included in sex discrimination in our standard under Title VII. And the reason why that's important is just as background on Title VII. Title VII is a law that prohibits discrimination in the workplace and applies to workplace benefits. And so it prohibits employers from denying or discriminating against employees with regard to their benefits and other pay, compensation, and other benefits, things that they get in the workplace. And so it's often, Title VII is often invoked in litigation over benefits. And so the result of this, of course, is that Section 1557, since it uses the same language for its sex discrimination standard that's in Title VII, it's very likely now that the HHS removal of gender identity from the sex discrimination standard is going to be challenged as a result of the Supreme Court decision. And so, if you're a plan sponsor out there that does receive federal funding or that has adopted rules to be consistent, adopted rules in your plan to be consistent with 1557, you may want to wait a little bit to see how this plays out in the courts, because I think it's very likely that there will be additional challenges now to 1557. So it's definitely not the time to make significant changes to your plan based on all this litigation. And of course, it's just a sort of a general guidance and takeaway here. You don't want to be, eliminating, gender reassignment surgery if it's something you've had, and as a result of this, it's probably best to kind of wait and see how this plays out in the courts, and in order to avoid potential litigation that's out there. And one other thing we should mention while we're on the topic of the Supreme Court, which is that a major decision was issued by the Supreme Court last week, for which we also have an e-alert available, and that decision upheld the much litigated and controversial regulations that expanded religious and moral exemptions to the ACA's contraceptive coverage mandate. And specifically, that ruling allows employers that object to offering contraceptive medical care or treatments on their health plans, objecting on either religious or moral grounds, to simply not offer those contraceptive services or treatments to employees of their organizations through their health plans, and they no longer, such employers and sponsors of health plans no longer have to go through the accommodation process that was required under previous rules issued during the Obama administration, and so that should be a much simpler process for those employers with those objections going forward. Okay, so with that being said, Dot, do you want to go on and talk about more about the new guidance on COVID-19 testing and treatment?
Sure. So on June 23rd, 2020, the DOL issued additional FAQs relating to the COVID-19 testing mandate under the FFCRA and the CARES Act. And as we all remember, which requires that employer health plans covering testing for the coronavirus at no cost share. So let's talk about some of these major clarifications in the second round of guidance from June 23rd. So the first thing, the rules clarified which tests are covered. So employer health plans only have to cover the cost of COVID tests that have been approved by the FDA and tests for which a provider has received this emergency use authorization from the FDA. If a participant has taken a test that is not FDA approved, the plan is permitted to request evidence that the developer has submitted the test prior to paying for that test at 100%. If no such evidence is provided, the plan is permitted to charge cost sharing or deny the coverage for the test in accordance with its normal terms. The second is the meaning of attending healthcare provider. So prior guidance indicated that plans were only required to provide no-cost coverage for testing that is determined to be medically appropriate by the individual's primary care provider. The FAQs clarify that that doesn't have to be the case anymore. It doesn't necessarily need to be the person's primary care, but this attending provider's order will suffice if the provider makes an individualized assessment, is licensed under applicable law, and is acting within the scope of his or her license.
Yeah, just to clarify something there, Dot. Sorry,
yeah, sure.
Dot, sorry to interrupt you real quick, but just to clarify that, the old rules didn't actually say primary care. I think just wanted to clarify. People had interpreted them as applying only to primary care, and so that's why there was some confusion about whether this COVID-19 test would be authorized and covered without cost sharing or not, and so because no one knew what it meant to be an attending healthcare physician, so now these new rules clarify it does not have to be the primary care provider. I think you may have said just by accident that the old rules said primary care, but I think that was just how they were interpreted. I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Gotcha.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, sure.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, you're the lawyer. You're the one. You can interrupt anytime you want.
Of course, I have the technical legalese interruption, of course.
Yeah. We just need somebody to overrule you. That's all I have to say.
Exactly.
All right. So let's talk about at-home testing coverage. So the FAQs clarify that approved at-home tests must be covered with no cost sharing, again, when ordered by that attending provider in accordance with the guidance clarified above. We have a lot of confusion around this return to work, employment screening. So many employers have begun routine testing of employees in conjunction with a return to work policy. The guidance clarifies that testing conducted to screen for general workplace health and safety, for public health surveillance, or for any purpose not primarily intended for diagnosis or treatment is not covered under the mandate. So employers should consider whether federal or state obligations would otherwise require that the employer pay for such testing if mandated for return to work purposes, even though those costs cannot be passed on to the plan. Also, questions about multiple tests. How many tests? Is it just an initial test, under the plan that is, paid for with no cost sharing? So the FAQs clarify that there is no limit on the number of tests a given individual may receive at no cost under the employer's health plan due to the mandate. So I think that's kind of common sense in the fact that, individuals can be exposed multiple times, you have different situations, and especially now that, people are returning to the workforce, and riding public transportation, there could be more situations where they're now being exposed more, they want to be tested more frequently. Also want to talk about out-of-network or balance issues clarified. And so basically, while the CARES Act requires that the plan pay the posted cash rate on the provider's website for non-network COVID testing, the FAQs make clear that the plan may apply its regular reimbursement methodology for any other service provided in the non-network setting. So, for instance, if the plan typically pays a UCR, usual and customary rate for non-network services, that pricing process should be able to be applied to any non-network services received other than the actual charge for the COVID test itself. The FAQs do go on to state, however, that for non-network emergency services, the ACA governs the required reimbursement rate for non-network emergency services. What about notification requirements after the conclusion of the public health emergency period? The FAQ suggests that plans must provide notice within a reasonable time frame in advance of any cutback to the cost-free testing at the conclusion of the public health emergency, unless the plan had originally notified participants of the general duration of benefits. So basically, this would mean that if the original notice indicated that the plan would only cover cost-free testing during an emergency period specifically, the subsequent notice wouldn't be required because you have basically plan participants have already been notified basically of the end date. How about standalone telehealth permitted with relaxed rules? So this was definitely a big reversal in that the FAQs provide that even though telehealth would be considered a group health plan subject to the various ACA requirements, the DOL will permit employers to offer standalone telehealth or remote care services due to the nature of the pandemic. And they can do that without meeting all of the ACA's market reform requirements, including preventative care mandate. This relief really only applies, though, to large employers under the Public Health Service Act, generally those with 50 or more employees on average during the prior year. And further, the FAQ makes clear that certain other standards would still apply to such coverage, such as prohibition on pre-existing conditions, prohibition against discrimination on health status, etc. And then finally, in separate regulation, but kind of goes along with this, is that the EEOC clarified that using COVID-19 antibody testing for purposes of determining an employee's healthy status for returning to work violates the ADA. The decision was based basically on recent CDC findings, concluding that such tests were not sufficiently reliable. The EEOC did say, however, that their views may change if antibody testing should become more reliable in the future.
Thanks, Dot. And I think a notable and key distinction here was drawn in this new June 23rd guidance from the DOL regarding diagnostic testing versus return to work or employment screening testing, which in this new guidance that Dot was discussing, right, the DOL confirms that employers and insurers are not required to pay for COVID-19 tests that are not used for diagnostic purposes, such as back to work or return to work or general screening or employment screening tests. And this is something that I think was insurers and stakeholders like the National Association of Insurance Commissioners had really pushed strong to get some clarity on this topic. Although while they did give us the clarity, it still leaves significant questions for for employers, for employees, and for the employees' workplace safety concerns, as there's already a lot of labor disputes on the issue of who will pay for these employment-related non-diagnostic return to work tests. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I think it's just an important thing to understand that the DOL kind of took a step back and said, look, the FFCRA and the CARES Act do not have any mandate that applies to this return to work testing. And so they basically said we're just talking about this as as far as diagnostic purposes only, right? Like something where a participant of your health plan goes to their doctor and requests a diagnostic COVID-19 test, and not something that an employer is initiating. Okay, so I think this, I think we should now talk about the, focus on our main, presentation for today. Of course, the focus, returning to work, right? We've gone through all the major rules now, and I think it goes, without saying now that what happened at the beginning in March with the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the workplace, it was truly unprecedented, right? We saw, across the country, companies doing furloughs, doing RIFs or reductions in force, including permanent and temporary layoffs, as well as reductions in hours, intermittent layoffs, and furloughs that included all of the above. And it was just a very scary time for employers and insurance carriers, as they reacted in different ways, often by allowing employers and plan sponsors to deem furloughed or temporarily laid off employees as active for purposes of the health insurance coverage for periods of 90 to 120 days. And this was just also a very interesting time from a compliance standpoint, given all of the new rules coming out under the FFCRA and CARES Act on expanded FMLA, paid sick leave, as we discussed in our last webinar. So what's happening now, right? Now that the state governments across the country have moved into later phases of reopening, many of those temporary layoffs and furloughs are now coming to an end. We just wanted to take a look back at what they were doing at the beginning of the furloughs, and here are two slides just kind of looking back at all the things they were doing at the beginning. When we did this at our last webinar, they're offering all kinds of special, waivers and extensions and all kinds of things to make it easier for employers to keep employees on the health insurance, right? So what's happening now, right? Well, of course, the carriers are ending a lot of those beneficial provisions that allowed the employees to stay on active employee status for the duration of the furlough, whether that was 90 days to 120 days, I think depending on the carrier. Employers faced with decisions about which employees to retain and at what hourly status now also have to consider their health insurance and other benefit plan coverage considerations. Do we offer them COBRA if we can't give them enough hours when they return to work? How do we deal with that? We talked a little bit about before, wellness vendors are now offering return to work program, medical testing, COVID-19 testing, temperature checks, and other programs. And of course, there's other plan vendors in the mix as well. There's COBRA administrators, there's third-party benefits consultants that offer return to work services like self-acknowledgement forms, notices, screening and logging tools, all kinds of software things for that. So there's a lot of things happening now that obviously were not happening at the beginning of those furlough periods, and and the laws also have changed. And I think I'm not going to go into all of the things it's kind of what we just talked about before, right? When we look at all these different laws changing, pretty much all of these laws changed. We talked about almost all of these today in the earlier part of our compliance update. They all changed, with the exception of HIPAA, really. I think, in many ways, HIPAA, there were changes to HIPAA with regard to, for example, telemedicine providers. There's going to be more relaxed HIPAA enforcement. for telemedicine providers, but it was not relaxed for covered entities, including employer-sponsored plans. And so HIPAA is definitely something that we still need to stay cognizant of and remain in compliance with. But obviously, there's so much flexibility that was granted by the agencies, the government agencies under these laws, that really we're kind of in a new normal now as we return to work. So what we thought we would do is we would look at we were going to take a look at some of the big return to work services and common return to work solutions offered by plan vendors, providers, and other third parties, and ask how do these things really stack up from a regulatory compliance perspective, right, against those laws we just looked at. And so I'll go ahead and get started with an easy one, I think, that we all know the answer to since we just talked about it, which is what about FDA-approved COVID-19 antibody testing for return to work purposes? And that one was really easy because Dot just talked about it. We know that the COVID-19 antibody testing violates the ADA based on that recent EEOC guidance, and so definitely that is not something you want to make sure that that's not included in your return to work playbook that your organization is using. So what about FDA-approved COVID-19 antibody testing services that are provided to employees on a voluntary basis, right? What if it's voluntary? That is, anyone can do it who wants to do the antibody testing, and it's not used for determining who is healthy enough to return to work. Well, that should be okay, assuming that you don't run that information through the health plan. That is, you coordinate the testing through your company's health plan and keep that information in the employee's medical files. And the reason for that is really, an employer shouldn't really be accessing the employees or participants' health records from the medical plan. They shouldn't be obtaining those health records. They shouldn't be accessing it from the plan to determine if the employees have obtained a COVID-19 test, or even get a result, right? Because unless that kind of action was authorized by the employee in a way that that would be authorized under HIPAA, that would definitely run into challenges. It would likely violate HIPAA and other privacy laws. And so really it's best to do these types of testing, return to work testing solutions through some kind of third party vendor or definitely not through the health plan to avoid those HIPAA and privacy law violations. So Dot, do you want to take us to the next few?
Sure. So what about non-FDA approved COVID-19 antibody testing provided on a voluntary basis? Well, this should be okay, as it's not necessarily going to violate any law on its own, but if you are offering that through your health plan as a covered item, it may not qualify as being a type of FFCRA approved antibody testing that must be offered without cost share. So as a result, participants could get upset if that they're having this test, not being made aware of this issue, and then they're getting a bill for that. So this was a very common problem we were seeing a couple months ago. Very high participant charges to participants for non-FDA approved antibody tests, and it wasn't clear if it was because they were not FDA approved or because they were not considered to be diagnostic. So really the best approach is to clearly communicate to participants that it should be diagnostic, that is approved by a physician for the detection or diagnosis of COVID-19, and it should be an FDA approved or on the approved testing type list on the FDA website. And a physician, should be able to notify the participant of that. Okay, how about COVID-19 viral testing that is for the virus itself for return to work purposes? That should be okay, again, assuming that you don't run it through the health plan, and as that would cause HIPAA issues, which Dan just talked about. How about COVID-19 viral testing offered on a voluntary basis? This also should be okay, but if on a voluntary basis, you may not need a vendor to do this for your employees, since the plan is required to offer without any cost sharing. So really, the employee can go through their doctor, through the health plan on their own. What about COVID-19 take-home tests? That should be okay as well if it's for viral testing, although it's not clear if that would be as effective as a tool for truly determining COVID-19 status, for determining if your employees are healthy enough to return to work. So just a little caution there. How about temperature checks, on-site and mandatory? Again, okay, but it's really best to have this done by a vendor. That is, in most cases, you're not going to want to have another employee who is not trained in this, like someone from HR doing these temperature checks, and employers should not retain the records in the health plan or do anything else to offer this through the health plan. All right. How about acknowledgement forms asking about contact with exposure to COVID-19? Generally, this should be okay, but it really depends a lot on what you're asking in the acknowledgement form. If it's simply that, if you're asking simply that have you been exposed to COVID-19 or are you experiencing a fever above 102 today, that's generally going to be okay. But it should not be asking questions that are not relative to COVID-19 exposure or risk. And then finally, how about an acknowledged form or screening requesting specific family medical history, but not specific to COVID-19. I think we all know that one is not okay. An employer can never ask about family history or medical history as it is a violation of the ADA and potentially other labor and employment laws. So Dan, why don't you finish up with these?
Sure. Great. Thanks, Dot. And so let's talk a little bit about, benefits consultants, legal services, carrier services, TPA services that provide things like plan amendments, SMMs, updated SBCs, and other compliance notices and services. And well, interestingly, I think for most, the short answer is no, right? You do not need these things. You don't have to do them. From a compliance standpoint, but you probably should is probably the right way to answer that question. And I think, it's obviously not, there's nothing in these laws that absolutely require these things, of course, unless you're, making changes as a plan that you need to make. We talked earlier about COBRA and those deadline extension rules, which, while there's no technical requirement in those rules that says you have to do a plan amendment or provide a notice, you really should consider that. Amending the plan or at least providing some kind of notice. Certainly, of course, if you are talking about amending your plan to take advantage of that cafeteria plan relief that Dot talked about in that IRS guidance, then you definitely need to do an amendment to take advantage of that relief. But other things you're not going to need to do. But of course, what we talked about before is that even though there is no rule in those new rules, there's no actual rule saying you have to do a notice. You probably want to make sure you're complying with your ERISA fiduciary standards, because assuming, of course, your plan is subject to ERISA, then you do have a fiduciary duty to provide notice of changes in rules that could have a material impact on participants. And so for that reason, you should probably do at least some kind of notice. While it may not be a formal plan amendment or something like that, you definitely want to do that. And as far as, I think as an additional comment here, as many employers learned the hard way, I think, during the pandemic, right, you may want to amend your plan document to give yourself more flexibility to COBRA people out that you don't want to return to work as full-time at the end of the furlough or temporary layoff time period, or just to give your organization more flexibility. Right now, a common problem that exists is that many plan documents are synced to the ACA and have defined measurement periods for all classes of employees of 6 to 12 months, and that means if someone has been working full-time hours during the measurement period, then the employer has to offer them coverage for the entirety of that associated stability period. And of course, that could be a 12-month period, and that could be a long time. So even if that person is working part-time hours when they come back, you may still have to be offering them coverage under that 12-month stability period associated with the prior measurement period. And so what you could do is you could, fortunately, of course, that problem could be fixed on a going forward basis. You could define certain classes of employees that you may want to COBRA out in the future by changing them to a monthly measurement method, or by shortening the measurement and stability look-back periods, which can give your organization considerably more flexibility, although perhaps some more administrative work in the short term, and of course those are services that we can assist with, corporate synergies. And finally, I think when it comes to COBRA, we're going to save the best for last with COBRA notices, right? I think in most cases, right, you really should be updating those COBRA notices. In most cases, I think the COBRA administrators or third-party service firms have provided language on the deadline extension rules, and it is something you really should be taking into account. And of course, considering the ACA rules that we just talked about, in combination with your COBRA administration and what you are doing, with your plan, because those are really important discussions to have, with your trusted advisors and consultants. So, okay, so I see we're getting close to the end here, so let's just take a minute to talk about some key takeaways here. And I think, as you can see, this is a swiftly changing regulatory landscape that we now all are in together, with lots of relief and lots of extensions and lots of new rules to take into account. So if you're in your HR or benefits department, you're thinking of hiring a new vendor or wellness provider or other third party to handle return to work testing, you really want to look very closely at the services that they're offering and make sure that they are appropriate for what's happening now. You want to read the fine print of their service offering and proposed services agreement. You want to make sure that your organization isn't taking on too much of the risk, and that the proposed programs and services align not just with your company's workplace policies and return to work playbook, but also with your company's culture, values, and benefits philosophy. And last but not least, of course, discuss any of these important potential decisions with your trusted advisors like Dot and myself. And that's it. That's it for today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, everybody. And Edison, I know we went through a lot of information. We do have our resource center, a lot of the regulations that I spoke about in the beginning. We've done e-alerts on that, and those can certainly be found, on our website. We do send those out regularly, so you can either contact your account management team or, go directly to our website and access that information.